This is the first technology update of this year. We try to do them about once a quarter. This one's been delayed slightly because unfortunately I had to have some time off. It was really nice being on a beach in the sun. But now that I'm back, a bit of catching up to do, and it's time to give you what I think are the important elements that Microsoft have released inside Azure, Office 365 and so on over the past 3 months or so. So with that, we're going to be looking at Azure Active Directory as usual. We're going to be talking about Intune, a little bit about information protection, and a large announcement that Microsoft made this week about that. I'm going to give you an early warning. It's not very early, but it's more a reminder of things that we need to do towards the end. A long time ago, and in IT a long time could of course be about a year, people started realizing that we had an issue with IP addressing. The standard IP address, which we're all familiar with, or IP4 as it's known, was going to run out of space. So back in 1998, so that's last century, people decided that IPv6 or IP6 should come along and replace it. The original draft standard was brought out in 98, ratified, and officially launched as an addressing scheme that we could access back in 2012. That's 11 years ago. And over that period, not really much seems to have happened. It's been very slow for ISPs and organizations to pick up on IP6 and actually start implementing it. And that lack of support has really hurt, particularly when it comes to trying to make use of the new technology and being able to increase the size and access and the ability of our networks to process. Azure AD now supports IP6 as of March 31st. So we've had 2 weeks now of this being there. And if you're using IP6 on your internal networks, it's very important that you realize you've got to do something. We've been using IP4 with conditional access policies, usually around network locations. So if we recognize an IP address as being an internal site, we'll allow somebody in without MFA. Switching to IP6 means that IP4 check is no longer valid. Now that's a bit of a problem because it means IP6 could step around your CA policies. So you need to identify any named location that might have IP6 in use, work with your ISP, your network team, to make sure you understand the egress points and add those to any of the named locations in your environment. Obviously, if you're not using IP6 internally yet, you don't need to worry about this. But for those people who have got it or are moving towards it, it's something that's definitely worth engaging with and making sure you're ready. We've been talking also about cross-tenant synchronization, and it feels like forever. The ability to automatically add, provision, and allow access to people from other tenants. Now, this is a technology that went into preview, public preview, around the end of January this year, and it automatically creates guest accounts. These are the B2B accounts in your tenant based on a relationship you have with somebody else. So when working with Cocho, it means that the project team from Cocho could be automatically added to your tenant so that we can sign in and do work that you allow us to do. Now that can be based on a group membership, or it can also be based on attributes, allowing us to identify specifically which users should be allowed in. With B2B, the traditional method of doing it by email address has meant that we've only really had the email address available to us in the directory. What we really could do with is full names, proper names, departments, telephone numbers, all of the information that's in the directory service where the source user is. So that functionality has now been added, and the cross-tenant synchronization can actually start to use that. And of course, because it's there, we can do transformations on this. We can add text, and I'll show you how this works in a second. We can also link this to your CA policies and also to your cross-tenant access policies. And it's all done very, very simply through the cross-tenant synchronization and provisioning engines. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, let's start off by looking at external identities. This is something that's been there for a while. You've been able to set Cocho or another organization up as an external provider. We must do this in order for the cross-tenant synchronization to work. So we need to go into the organizational settings and make sure we've added the organization. And you can see here, I've added an organization called DG Demo to my environment. I also need to make sure that I've configured properly the inbound and outbound access. Now, in this case, I'm actually taking information from the tenant I'm looking at now and pushing it into my demo tenant. So it's outbound access that I needed to configure. I also need to make sure that I'm automatically accepting any prompts for that invite to work. And this really has to be done on both sides in order for everything to work correctly. So go into the configuration on both sides, create the external directory, enable the outbound and inbound configuration. Once we've done that, we can then go into the cross-tenant configuration and we start to look at actually mapping the attributes. Now, the attribute map looks very similar to the SCIM configuration that we've been looking at before. And here you can see the start of the attribute mapping. You can see I've got it enabled, and you can see right at the bottom of the screen, I've got some additional attributes that are going to be coming across, both from the source and also which attribute I'm going to put them into. Now, it could be that we have duplicate names. Alex Wilbur is one of the demo users that we have in most of the Microsoft demo environments. Now, what I don't want to do is get Alex confused and have two people with exactly the same display name. So what I'd like to do is do a transformation on it of the display name, and I'd like to add the words external -Contoso to the display name. And you can see here the syntax that I've used to make that happen as the information flows from the source to the target. Once that's there, that should make sure it happens each time. And there is the ability to test that configuration as you go. We need to scope the users. Now, this could be scoping via attribute, or we can actually use all users and then limit it to specific users and groups that we want to put in. Very similar to what we do with enterprise applications. If you're not added to the application itself, you can't run it. If you're not added specifically to the configuration, even if it looks like you're in scope, you won't actually be passed across. So, things not to forget. First of all, add the users and groups. Make sure that you've got them in the right place. So here I've added a group called marketing, and I've added Alex as a user I want to pass across. We then need to test it, and we can kick off a manual provision just to test that a specific user will flow correctly. And here I've taken Alex, I've imported the user, determined that they're in scope, matched the user, and performed the provision. And I can see that at each step it's actually worked correctly. The other thing I must remember to do is turn this on. There's a little button that's hidden at the bottom of the provisioning screen that actually says provisioning status on or off. If you don't remember to turn it on, you will probably spend the next hour or so wondering why it didn't work. So what does this look like at the other end? Well, if I have a look at Azure Active Directory inside my demo environment, and I have a look for users, I can see here that I've now got a user called Alex Wilbur, external Contoso, with an email address of alexw_, well, we can all read the screen. And you can see that that's come from an external user account. So this ability then to add these users in automatically will help us to make sure that users working on projects across organizations will be able to access the information correctly. Because they're proper users inside the directory, we can also make sure that they're included in conditional access policies, in access reviews, attestation. They can request additional access, and the control of that access is still with the main admin. So if you're inviting Cocho in, the Cocho admin cannot affect your environment. The only people who can administer what I as a user could do is your own internal admins. But being able to get these user accounts directly into Azure Active Directory is one really good step. Other things that we need to do with this, though, is add those users to other on-premises applications. And again, this is something that's now being made available. We can do this to a SQL database, to an LDAP directory service, or through Skin. And this is all done using the Azure provisioning engine, where we get to see exactly what's been happening and we can configure it. We can do a very similar set of operations in terms of transformation of data as we go from Azure Active Directory into the target. We can use access reviews to make sure that the user should still be in scope and still be added to the application. So we're adding security into the environment as we go. Now today, we are limited to those three. However, within the next quarter, we're expecting Microsoft to announce PowerShell, web services, and custom connectors to this. Those custom connectors will use a very similar model to the MIM, Extensible Connectivity Management Agents, or ECMA, that we've been using for the past 20 years. That will then allow us to provide a full migration from an on-premises MIM environment through to a cloud-based provisioning service, something we've been looking at for years. With federated identities, Microsoft have been supporting SAML pretty much since Azure Active Directory came out. But SAML has been limited pretty much by the number of attributes that we can actually make use of. ADFS and systems like Shibboleth gave us the ability to look up data from external sources and add it to our SAML. This custom claim provider is something that happened in the Azure Active Directory B2C environment a few years ago, and it's now being added to the Azure Active Directory authentication flow, allowing us to have additional information passed over as part of the token to a target system. When the user starts their authentication, we configure a flow that calls an API to an external system and will pull that into our environment. So we create a new custom extension, and then within that custom extension, we tell it where we want to get the information from and how we want actually to present that as part of SAML. Inside this, we can say we want to make something like an employee number available from an HR system rather than from our internal directory. Adding that into the SAML will then make it available correctly to the target system, which should simplify matters a huge amount, particularly in education, where Shibboleth, as a rule, generally has a lot of attributes that are not normally found inside Azure Active Directory. Local admin has also been a problem for quite a while. Lapse has been available with Active Directory domain services for years. It's required us to install some additional software onto a device using an MSI pushed by Intune, System Center, or Group Policy. But as of the update that Microsoft provided this week, so second week in April, we have now added that to Windows 11 Pro, Education and Enterprise, Windows 10 Pro, Education and Enterprise, Server 22, and Server 2019. It's probably not going to be retrofitted back to 2016 and the like, but it's actually available. And it's a native integration. So it's built into the operating system. There's no need for us to add on an additional MSI. The password encryption has been improved. It gives us access to a password history. So if a device has to go back in time through a restore, we can still make sure that we gain access to it. It automatically rotates passwords, which is a great thing for ensuring that our security is kept high. You may have noticed I've not mentioned Azure Active Directory yet on this slide. And that's because that's not quite there yet. But we're expecting the public preview of Lapse for Azure AD to actually come out in the next 3 months. So this is something you can start preparing for. Stored passwords are held inside the normal key stores and are accessible through Microsoft Graph, making sure that the user can only get at the password they need when they need it. It uses role-based access control, making sure that only the right user can gain access to those passwords. The portal is in use and supports the automatic rotation of the password, and this is all managed through Intune, and we'll come back to that in a second. Once an account has been used, the system is clever enough to know that that password needs to be rotated, and it will automatically do that. If the same user then goes back in to do the same task, they will use the new password, and again, it will be automatically rotated. Something that we've been crying out for a long time is that ability to allow a user to control just their device. The current role-based method of allowing a user to administer devices, unfortunately, allows that user to administer all workstations. This is a way of getting away from that and giving us a much better control of how that works. Intune has had pretty much a major makeover. The Intune suite was announced, and this is taking all of the elements of Intune, System Center, Config Manager, Intune itself, the Endpoint Manager, and putting them together under a single banner. Intune as an access point is now more available, which is a great thing, and it's going to give us access to this endpoint privilege management, the Lapse that we've just been talking about. It's giving us better endpoint analytics and giving us much better access to systems. Over the next quarter, we are expecting to see the advanced application management coming through, the access to an enterprise application catalog, better app discovery and deployment, but more importantly, and this is buried in the documentation, automatic updating of non-Microsoft applications looks like they are now being added in. Now, there isn't any clarity yet on how that's going to work and whether or not the application that's being used will allow an update automatically, or whether the application will have to be modified in some way to do that. But it's definitely something that is exciting, and we've needed this for a long time. Mac's also had some major updates. It is now possible through Intune to specifically push out vulnerability patches. We can send firmware updates out to Mac and include elements like XProtect, malware removal tools and Gatekeeper, and even update built-in applications in the OS such as Safari. We can also add in standard application updates and operating system updates, making sure that our devices, of course where they're supported, can be updated to Mac OS 13.3 rather than just 13.1. Microsoft have also brought forward the Microsoft Tunnel for MAM. Now this is an implementation of the Tunnel VPN, but uses application management rather than enrollment of the device. And it's available for iOS and Android now. It extends the VPN functionality to devices which are not managed by Intune, so unenrolled devices. And that should allow us to take these unenrolled devices, particularly things like bring your own device and other places where we do not have full management of a device, and allow them to access these on-premises applications. Normally they'd be web-based, but it would potentially allow us to access thick applications as well, where the tablet or the phone has that thick application available. On the downside, and this is one of the downsides of the Intune suite, Intune Plan 2, which is a new licensing model, is required for the Tunnel for MAM to actually work on those mobile devices. So there is an interesting implication around using the Tunnel for MAM. The admin center has also been updated. We can now get to it through intune.microsoft.com again, although I must admit I'm still typing endpoint into my URL when I started. The devices area is being hugely restructured. You can see a preview of that at the moment, and there is more monitoring being made available directly to us straight away. And here you can see an example of the devices page as it is. I'll apologize for the fact that my system, my demo environment, doesn't have many devices in it, but it gives you a clue as to where things are going. These things are going to be much more readily apparent and made available to us on a regular basis. Staying with the Apple theme, Microsoft have also announced that we can now use a shared device mode on Apple devices. In retail and in health, it's quite often that a tablet of some kind gets used by multiple people, but yet the data that the tablet is accessing needs to be set for the individual. Android has been able to do this for a while, but now we have a shared device mode on Apple. This will allow a user quickly and easily through the Authenticator app to sign in to applications which are supported. Obviously, that is a caveat that the application itself needs to be a supported app and know how to do its switching. We can query the state of the device and also the user so that we can see how that's actually working. To do it, we need the Authenticator app on the device. We also need to distribute the Enterprise SSO plugin down to the Apple device, and it requires a little bit of configuration. So the SSO plugin needs to know how to actually do that authentication, where to sign in, and the URLs for this are available, so you don't have to just write them down quickly now. But we also need to tell the device using a key to switch into a shared device mode. And this key is actually done again through the Authenticator app, which allows us very, very quickly to get a device, to switch it to shared mode and get those users working in an effective manner. So coming towards the end, information protection had a major announcement that was made this week. For a long time, we've looked at using the Unified Labeling Client, the UL client, on our Windows devices to enable things like the labeling bar at the top of a document, to enable things like the Outlook pop-ups when we're sending an email that is labeled and going to somebody external. That functionality was put into a sleeping mode about a year ago. Microsoft announced that they weren't going to make any new updates to the client. They would still fix it, but no additional functionality would be added. This week they announced that the UL client will be retired. And the reason for that is the functionality that it uses has now been built into all of the Microsoft 365 apps. That's for Windows and Mac and for the browser, allowing us to apply the sensitivity labels regardless of the platform we're using. Now, this is only available inside the native apps. So this is Word, Excel, and PowerPoint and Outlook, but it has all of the functionality that we need and does also include PDF support, which has been, which is something we've wanted for quite a long time. Now, this is happening, but we've got quite a bit of notice. It's actually scheduled for April the 11th next year. So we have a year to make sure that we're testing this and deploying it correctly. Any machine that is getting an update today to the Microsoft 365 apps will automatically have the UL client disabled unless you ask for it to be turned on. And just to make sure that we're all clear, the feature parity for this is now very clear. All of the options that are on the screen now are available fully inside Office 365. So we should be able to cleanly remove the UL client. However, it is not yet built into Windows. So if we need to use the Classify and Protect right-click from Explorer, that functionality will still require the AIP client. As soon as we have a date and time for that being removed, we will of course let you know. Microsoft are also very good at deprecations, taking things away, and this is where I'm going to act as your reminder. Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2012 R2 are both coming to the end of their extended support. Officially, it ends on October the 10th of this year. That may feel like nearly 6 months away, but 6 months in IT is not very long at all. We need to be in a position to make sure that if we still have 2012 and 2012 R2 servers or anything older, we are aware of the implications. Now is the time to be looking at the estate and making sure that we are in a position to remove those and make sure that we're in a good place. So there's a couple of questions that have been thrown out over the chat, one of which I know has been answered directly. But a questioner is, does this allow us to remove a user's local admin and grant them the ability to use a local admin account without sharing the password? And this is talking about the lapse for Azure AD. And the simple answer is yes. The idea will be that the user can request through a workflow that they are elevated to get local admin for a set period. Now that could be through the use of a secondary account. It could be through the elevation of their own privilege using a specific password. As to exactly how that's going to work, we don't know yet because it's still in private preview, but it is something that we know is being worked on. And once that public preview comes out and we can start to show you it, then we will make sure we do a session specifically on that, because it is a much needed change to the way we are securing our systems. So with that, I'm going to bring this to an end. If there is anything that you would like to do, any more information you need on any of this, as a next step, you can talk to us, book in a visioning call where we will spend some time talking to you specifically about any issues you've got, or any of the technologies that we've been through inside this webinar. So with that, at just over half an hour running time, which is pretty good, it's what I aim for, I'd like to thank everybody, and I'll hope to see you at the next event.